Hey friend, Chris here from WhyLogicProRules.com, the website that helps you get the most you can out of Apple's Logic Pro. Welcome to day 21 in our Newbie to Ninja series here on the channel and website, where I'll help you go from being a beginner in Logic Pro to become an expert, fully comfortable and capable to get right down to making awesome music in this amazing application. Today, let's dig into Apple Loops in the Apple Loop browser, which can be seen over here on the right-hand side of the application. And you can open and close the Loop browser at any time by going to the Loop browser button in the upper right-hand corner of the control bar. Apple Loops are pre-recorded loops and samples that you can use at any time for your projects, whether it be for a quick drum beat, a rhythm part, a sound effect, a riser, or even a musical idea that could be the center and focus of your entire production. And the best part is Apple Loops are royalty-free. The easiest way to get started with Apple Loops in your projects is really just to start scanning around, just by scrolling through the different Apple Loop options, and then clicking on different Apple Loops to preview them in context with your project. For example, let's click on the 16mm film electric piano to take a listen to what it sounds like. Clicking again on an Apple Loop will stop playback, and as you saw, when I clicked on that Apple Loop, a waveform preview popped up at the bottom of the browser, and a playhead scrolled through the loop as it previewed. What's even cooler about Apple Loops is that on the fly, they will conform to the tempo and the key signature of your projects. So if we adapt the tempo here, let's maybe say from 120, let's go down to 110 and set the key signature to that of B minor. Now let's take a listen. Once again, let's set this to maybe A sharp minor at 130. And once you identify an Apple Loop that works with your project, all that's left is to click, hold, and then drag that Apple Loop into an empty section of the tracks area. Once we let go, a track lane and channel strip will be created for our Apple Loop. And take a look. We don't have just a static audio loop, but instead we have a MIDI region of which we can edit the individual notes of the performance in the piano roll editor. And we also have a patch loaded that includes the electric piano instrument, plus a delay plugin and a compressor, as well as some routing to some reverbs. So as you can see, Apple Loops can be quite a bit more than just simple audio files. In fact, there are actually 4 different Apple Loop types. If we go back to the Loop browser with our mouse, we see in the left corner above the Apple Loops this colored icon that looks like a grid. If we click on this icon, a menu pops up showing us all 4 different loop types. First, we have audio loops, which are noted by the blue waveform icon. And as you can see, when I clicked on the audio loops option in the loop types pop-up menu, we narrowed the search in the Loop browser to just that of audio loops. After that, we have software instrument loops that are noted by the green musical note icon. Then we have pattern loops, which are noted by a yellow icon with what looks like a gridded pattern inside. And lastly, we have drummer loops, which are a yellow icon with what looks like the graphics of a drummer region inside. And again, we can preview any of these loop types just by clicking on the Apple Loop in the Loop browser. In fact, let's select the region in the tracks area. I'll set up the cycle range and then hit play. And then we'll start to preview some Apple Loops in the context of our project. Here we go. So as you can see in here, everything is just locking into place. Some things work better in context than others, but the point is, thanks to the controls down here in the bottom left-hand corner of the Loop browser, we can choose to have Apple Loops either play in the song key of our project, in this case A sharp minor, or play in their original key, or we can choose a specific key for what our Apple Loop preview will play in. Okay, so all well and good that we're able to scan through tens of thousands of Apple Loops to try out for our project, but this can be kind of overwhelming, right? It's like searching for a needle in a haystack, especially when we're working with all the Apple Loop types, right? But thankfully, Logic provides several other ways for us to narrow our search within the Loop browser so we can find a loop or sample that will work best for our project. Obviously, aside from the loop type selector, we also have different categories to identify the name of an Apple Loop. as well as the length of an Apple loop, which can either be measured in beats, or if we scan a little, we may find some Apple loops that show us a length of time for how long they play. Additionally, there's a favorite column with which you can note your favorite Apple loops in the Loop browser simply by clicking on one of these empty checkboxes, or you can remove a favorite by clicking on a selected checkbox. And to the right of that, we have columns for the original tempo of each Apple loop, as well as the key signature of each Apple loop. More melodic instruments would have a designated key signature, while something like a drum kit, a key signature would not necessarily be applicable. If we take a listen to this two-step thump beat, whereas many loops will have a tempo, some don't, such as a drum sample or a sound effect. And looking towards the top of the Loop browser, we also have categories of which we can narrow down to a specific instrument, or genre, or even descriptor. So for example, maybe I'm looking for a synth in the genre chillwave. And maybe I'm looking for something kind of grooving. All right, so we have plenty of options within these selections. But if that's not enough, we can also choose a specific scale, whether it be minor or major, neither or both, as well as a time signature. Most likely everything here is in 4/4, but let's try 6/8. Yeah, all right, so we're looking at 4/4 for the most part. And to the right of that, we can also search by keyword. So if we search for vocals, look at that, we have 9 different items. All right, let's clear out our search by clicking on the orange X. And let's set the scale back to any and time signature to any as well. And lastly, Logic Pro comes with a ton of sound and producer Apple loop packs. And at the top, we have this sound pack selector with which we can choose from. So maybe let's take a look at the studio strings and check it out. All right, fantastic. Let's go back to the sound pack selector and set it to show all. And let's set the tempo of our project back to 120. And I'll set the key signature to that of C major. And let's get rid of this film electric piano. From here, I'll click on the favorite button all the way to the right at the top of the Loop browser. And this will narrow the search down again to my favorite Apple loops. Let's start dragging Apple loops into our project. I'm gonna start by dragging this beachside electric Apple loop into my project, right in this empty section of the tracks area, and letting go. All right, so we have an electric guitar played by a guitar software instrument with other plugins loaded on the channel strip. And if we take a listen, all right, sounds pretty good. Now check it out. If we drag the beachside electric once again into the project, but drag it onto an existing track, look at that. Once again, we have a software instrument performance that we can open using the editor and adjust the performance. However, if we undo this and drag the beachside electric onto an audio track, watch this. All right, Logic wants to know if I want to keep the track type or conform the track to the region. I'll keep the track format and let's click OK. Oh, look at that. Now we have an audio region with which there is no instrument plugin or other plugins to process. All this processing and performance have been baked into an audio Apple loop. Once again, if we take a listen, all right, cool. Let's get rid of that. Next up, we're going to bring in Curtis, one of our drummers from yesterday's video. And check it out. We get a drummer region and the drummer editor pops up so we can adapt the performance if we want. Let's take a listen. Cool. But again, let's drag Curtis's region here, not onto a drummer track anymore, but onto a software instrument track. We can see that we're getting a warning. I'm just going to let go. Oh, check it out. Now our drummer region has turned into a MIDI region. In this case, it's going to be playing an electric guitar. That's amazing, but not ideal for this situation. So let's get rid of it. And lastly, if we drag Curtis's region onto an audio track, we get the warning. We're going to keep the track format And look at that. We now have an audio region with this performance and processing baked in. And lastly, we have a pattern region, which in this case is the vintage tapes. If we drag it in to an empty section of the tracks area, we get a new channel strip and track with Alchemy as the instrument. If we take a listen, but once again, if we drag a pattern region onto an audio track, that performance is baked into an audio file. I just want to show you all the different ways that your performances will conform based on the track type that they're loaded onto. Now I'll load a bass loop that I imported into the Apple Loop browser right into our project. I'm going to make some edits just so we have something a little cooler to listen to. I'll set Curtis's performance to half time. Maybe move this over, reduce the length of this performance. Repeat it by using Command R, and then I'll hover my mouse over the right boundary of this electric guitar loop and just click, hold, and drag to loop this performance. Check it out. That's amazing. That's a great sounding section entirely based on Apple loops. And we can manipulate the length of any Apple loop however we see fit. As you saw, I was able to loop the Apple loop as well, and the looping is seamless. And some Apple loops are part of a more extended loop family. If we go to the upper left-hand corner of the Beachside electric guitar Apple loop, we can see this double arrow icon. And if we click on it, look at that. This is Apple loop number 1 of 17 different versions of this Beachside electric guitar. And we can flip between these different versions just by clicking on one of the options. Look at that, we swap the performance. Cool. All right, sweet. I'm going to pick number 1. That was my favorite. While it's awesome that Logic provides so many different Apple loops for you to use, maybe you want to create and save your own Apple loops. That's super simple. To illustrate, I'm going to navigate to the Finder, and I'm going to select this melodic loop from my desktop and drag it right into my project. All right, cool. So we have this new loop that we'll take a listen to. Thankfully, the person that created this loop provided us with the key signature and the tempo right in the title of the file. So let's click, hold, and drag this loop right into the Apple Loop browser. We see a plus icon, and let's let go. All right, cool. So now we can add this region to the Apple Loops library. Just like how we navigated through the loop browser, you can choose different descriptors and instruments and genre for your loop. But do take note, at this moment, we don't have the option to choose whether this loop should be considered a loop or a one-shot. And that's because our loop doesn't exactly end on a bar or a beat. And it's really because of the tempo of the project, right? We're at 120 BPM. And if our project was set to 134 BPM, this region would line right up with the grid. So we can do exactly that. We can set this to 134 BPM. Now our region lines right up. And we can see that all the Apple loops have conformed to what's going on with the tempo. And from here, we can drag our loop right into the loop browser once again. All right, sweet. So now we can save this Apple loop as an Apple loop, which affords us the ability to select the scale and the key signature of the loop. The tempo of the loop is specified by the project tempo itself right up here in the LCD. So now we can correctly tag this loop as B flat minor. And I'll specify its instrument as synth under keyboards, and I'll call it melodic. And let's now create. All right, so if we now clear our search and look for the melodic loop, there it is. Drag it right in. If we take a listen now, to the original version. And the loop. The loop has been transposed to match the key signature of our project. And the timing of this loop will now adapt to any tempo adjustments. Look at that. This is the original region, so thus it doesn't adapt to the change in tempo of our project. And lastly, if we go to the Finder, if you have a folder of loops that you want to add to the loop browser that don't necessarily have identifying features like tempo and key signature, well, we can select all those samples and drag them into the loop browser. When we let go, Logic Pro is offering us the ability to add these as untagged loops. As it says in the dialog right here, if these audio files have a constant tempo, start on a downbeat and end on a beat, they will adapt to the project tempo when previewed or added to the project. So let's add them. And check it out, we now have a new section in the Apple Loop browser called Untagged Loops. We have a folder called User Loops. We can double click to open. We take a listen. And from here, if we want to add an untagged loop to our project, we can once again drag and drop. Or we set the playhead, select a track, we can go down to add. Again, Apple Loops are royalty free. There are thousands of them to choose from, and they exist for you to use. So don't be afraid to dig into the Loop browser or create your own Apple Loops as well. Thanks so much, and I'll see you for more tomorrow in this Newbie to Ninja series. Take care.